Welcome to Clear Conversations, Entrepreneurial Legacies with your host, John Sleeting, an executive partner for Clearwater Capital Partners. Join John and his guests on this exclusive journey behind the scenes of extraordinary entrepreneurial families. In this series, we will dive deep into the stories of John's guests, who generously unveil the paths they've walked, the challenges they've overcome, and the wisdom they've gained along the way. Throughout these conversations, we explore their achievements beyond mere recognition, disclosing the distinctive perspectives that have shaped their entrepreneurial journeys. We hope you enjoy.
Welcome to the Clear Conversations series, Entrepreneurial Legacies. I'm your host, John Sleeting, executive partner of Clearwater Capital Partners. Today, I'm speaking with Terrance Wallace. Terrence and I have known each other for approximately 3 years. My wife, Melissa, and I have deepened our relationship as neighbors with Terrence and his wife, Besaida. We reside in Barrington Hills, Illinois. They have 10 boys and 1 daughter and are a fantastic family, and you're in for a treat in your time with Terrence today. Terrence is an entrepreneur focused both in for-profit and not-for-profit organizations. The stories and the multiple stories that he will walk you through today are significant, inspirational, and lessons learned, and that's an understatement. When we think about for-profit and not-for-profit entrepreneurism, the tax status should not dictate, enhance, or diminish the excellence that should be brought to any organization and what the mission is that you're trying to achieve. And Terrence has got just great examples of that, and you're, again, in for a treat. When Terrence and I were preparing, I use this concept of what's legacy, and I think about it as a eulogy. What do you want to be known for? You have to create your legacy during your lifetime, and it's only after you've passed of what people are saying about you. How do you think about what you're leaving behind, the people, the relationships, the impact that you've had on this world? And so that's what I want all of our listeners to be thinking about when they think about legacy. What is it that you want to be known for, and what is the story that you're writing today for yourself? Terrence, thank you again for being here today and joining me in the studio. As we prepared, we talked about putting into words an introduction. How do I best introduce you? We've been friends for 3 years, but coming into this, really you getting your words together. And as I read through them and reflected upon them, I think this beautifully captures who you are, that if something tragic happened today and you left this world, what would you want people to say about you? So I'm going to go ahead and read through those words, and then we'll dig in a little bit more in the conversation. Terrance Wallace is an accomplished and proactive entrepreneur with over 2 decades of experience in for-profit and nonprofit leadership. With a track record of success in building organizations from the ground up, his expertise lies in business development, strategic planning, consulting, fundraising, and marketing. Terrance values people-focused leadership, championing a collaborative and inclusive environment that encourages all team members to contribute and feel valued. He brings a global mindset to all his work, gained from years of experience working with youth and multidisciplinary teams in disadvantaged countries. This experience has provided him a broader understanding of how students achieve an education through a variety of learning methodologies and approaches. Driven by his passion to serve, Terrance founded the InZone Project, a highly successful learning model and environment for underachieving youth that has gained global recognition. His grassroots approach ensures no child is left behind and has resulted in notable improvements in academic achievements and social life. The InZone Project was awarded the prestigious World of Difference Award by Vodafone New Zealand and visited by Prime Minister John Key, who is interested in expanding its reach. In 2014, Terrance co-founded ScanOne, a biometric device business that assists in monitoring an individual's location and attendance in educational, business, and corporate settings. The device won the New Zealand Institute of Building Safety Excellence Award in 2016, which supports the NZIOB Trust, supports endeavors for the betterment of the construction industry. A reflection of both your nonprofit and for-profit crossover and endeavors. Terrance's articulate and inclusive communication style brings the right people together to solve any problem and overcome project challenges to achieve the desired outcome. He is a social entrepreneur with a tremendous heart and passion for empowering teams to achieve their mission. I've seen this. I know this about you. I think this so beautifully reflects how you operate in your day-to-day life as well. So let's begin and dig in. And Terrence, did I capture everything that you believe is a reflection of who you are?
Yes, and some. Yes, absolutely.
So when you step back and think about your accomplishments, again, in both arenas, is for-profit and non-for-profit. It's why we've got logos for a couple of your different endeavors, your businesses. Yes. Again, tax status to me should be irrelevant. Mm-hmm. You run organizations with excellence. Thank you. And you do that in for-profit and the not-for-profit world. What are you most proud of when you step back and reflect on your life?
What am I most proud of? I would say breaking the cycle for my family of poverty. Having lived in the hood and lived through poverty, just being able to make it out and then help someone else. I think breaking that cycle. I feel personally that I've been called to build bridges for young people and/or people who are disadvantaged to cross over to a different transformational life.
Yeah. So we have to rewind, right? We can talk about legacy, and it's always like looking backwards during the life that was written. Mm-hmm. So take us back in time a little bit. So if you, in your words, growing up in the hood, help the listeners understand a little bit of your background and where you came from, and we'll keep building on that as we move forward.
Definitely. So I'm from the west side of Chicago, from the Austin community. My mom was a single mom. I didn't know who my father was growing up. My mom has 14 brothers and sisters, and I have 76 first cousins. And so of the brothers and sisters, mom was the only one that had one child. So I was always in company of cousins and people at the house. Every week at mom's house was like, it's like being at Big Mama's. Everyone's over for dinner on Sunday. So it was a good experience from that regard. But we lived in a community that was transitioning to crime. And so in third grade, mom decided that she didn't want me to go to school in the neighborhood. And so myself and a few of my cousins were then bused out to a school that was very diverse in ethnic groups. However, not many African Americans or black kids there, or even brown kids for that matter. And so I end up in a classroom where I was the only black kid in the classroom for most of my classes. However, it was the best thing my mom could have ever done for me. Growing up in the environment that we were in, mom works 2 and 3 jobs growing up to provide for me, which I'm grateful for. And now having the opportunity to, support her as she goes through her senior years is just a joy for me. Yeah. And so growing up at Durskin Elementary School, I learned the value of diversity. And I think that that's a life-changing experience for someone like me, in that I learned the value of diversity, yet still being confident in being who I was as a young black boy. And then being identified as being special ed because my learning was so behind based on the other kids in my classroom. And so I grew up in my elementary and middle school stages in special education.
Okay.
By the time I got to high school, through my first year of high school, then those learning gaps kind of closed, and I started excelling like other kids were. But if my mom had not made the decision to transfer me so early, I wouldn't have, I would have still not been able to achieve at the levels that I needed to. And so going through that then led me to want to go to a university that had diversity. And I know that mostly in the black community, everyone just celebrates historical black colleges. And I respect that, I really do. But I think when you're at a school that has a form of segregation, regardless of the reasons for it, I think that it sets us up for failure as a people, because the real world, the marketplace, there is diversity. And there are other ethnic groups there that we have to learn how to coexist with and to do business with. And there's value in that. And I think that my innovation comes from that. And so I've always sought out ways to try to create diverse environments. And now, you have the InZone Project. But through that, so growing up in the hood and then getting into youth ministry, so I've always had a passion to change the narrative when it comes particularly to black men. And because I didn't have my father there, I would grab a hold of any male adult that I thought was doing something positive in life. And my mom was very good with pairing me off with mentors and people who she thought could add value or make up the gap that my father wasn't present for. And so I started a youth organization called Contrary Wind at 16 years old. And this is me, honestly, just straight out the gate, thinking I could make some sort of difference. And it basically was opposites from across the tracks coming together for a common cause. And so I would get the nerds who are, the geeky people on one side, and then get the athletes, the jocks, the cool kids, to try and get them to come together, and so that we can educate each other on these diverse, lifestyles or perspectives. What I didn't realize early on, which is why I do this now, is I didn't know anything about succession planning. And so when we all left to go away to university, there was no one left to make sure that was a tool that the community could use. I got in a lot of trouble for creating Contrary Winds because I was a part of a youth group at my church, and they thought that this was you shouldn't be out there, doing this with, what they called sinners, because I was trying to create some form of unity. Later on, they came to thank me because all those kids came to our youth group afterwards. But that was a part of my journey that was, I would say, quite significant. Pretty much the part where my mom had the discernment to move me at such a young age into a school environment and community where I could excel academically.
Yeah. Well, and to pause there, because there are so many lessons learned. I mean, one is I should probably have your mom come in and we should do a show with her, right? Working 2-3 jobs.
Yeah.
Hardest job in the world as a single mom in terms of trying to make ends meet in terms of what she was doing, and yet provide you the next opportunity, that you are her legacy in terms of what she's built into you and the person that you are by giving you and creating those opportunities through a lot of hard work and grit. And then, at 16 years old, right? Yeah. There's John Chapman, the CEO of our firm, right? He's got this saying is, suspend disbelief. I think there's so many people that step into any endeavor and they disbelieve. They just believe, here's all the reasons this can't be done. Yeah. Versus saying, well, no, this not only, can be done. In some way, we've got to figure that out. It has to be done because the purpose and the mission is so much greater than figuring out the how you do it. Yeah. If you understand how to create or what's needed, what's valued by these kids in this case, at 16 years old, you suspended disbelief and you said, no, I need to start an organization because here's what the need is. And then you start figuring it out over time. And then you learn things like, okay, succession planning is a big deal. Yeah. It's a big deal in everyone's organization. And you're working for the day, but if you're not also planning for that future in succession, you end up with issues that can rise and actually deteriorate the core vision that was there to begin. Absolutely. So your passion for youth, your entrepreneurial journeys beginning, your development of your intellectual capital, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But then your care for young people actually is what prompted you. You went to Eastern Illinois University, and your major was?
Childhood education.
Childhood education. Okay. And so a little bit more about your experience at university, why your focus was on kids, and how that's continued to shape who you are today.
Yeah, so childhood education came out of a desire to make a difference in the community. And so I thought I can get into teaching, which I never did, by the way, not in the sense of being in the classroom, because I thought the classroom was too restricted. But my desire didn't change around wanting to make a difference for young people and to give them access to opportunities that they may have not gotten based on where they lived within, so obviously, our community. And so at Eastern, it was amazing. Actually, I was just at Eastern a few weeks ago. Strangely enough, one of my boys was running the 4x4 and the 4x4 relay at the state finals. Yep. And it was at Eastern Illinois University. So my wife and I drove down, and I spent the day, and it was just so amazing. The very place I used to go to service, like church, and my life was transformed as a believer. We went visit those places, but just to see that one of my boys was running the same race I was running, and he came within the top 10 in the state, which was phenomenal. But I was a proud dad at that moment. But being at Eastern, it was I never got into drinking, drugs, or anything like that while at university. Primarily, obviously, my faith was developed. But then the other side of that, I was so fearful that based on my childhood trauma, that was going to, if I got a hold of drugs or alcohol, that would be my downfall, because I had seen it so much. I mean, there were plenty of kids at university who were getting high all the time. They used to have these big glass things like bombs. I think that's what they called them. And they would just be smoking all the time. I was like, well, how do you get schoolwork done if you're high all the time? But this was a thing back then. And so I just made up my mind that I wasn't going to do that. I think Mom...
And you don't drink to this day.
To this day, I don't drink. Yeah. It's so funny because my time in New Zealand, everyone thought that I was a recovering alcoholic because I didn't drink. Because it's just such a normal thing to do. Not that I have anything against anybody who does, but it's just...
But for you.
It was a choice for me based on the trauma that I experienced growing up, and that if I was going to solve my problems with any substance, that it would ruin my life. And so I'm just still determined that, to create legacy for me and what has come through my family, that I need to be very strict on certain things in my life, and that's one of them. Yeah.
And so kids mattered. You wanted to major in that for school, but when you graduated from university, you did not pursue that. You ended up at a major hospital institution here in the Chicago area.
Yeah, so West Suburban Hospital. I ended up there. So mind you, through my high school years, they had a work program. So in my sophomore year, I started working at the hospital, but in the housekeeping department. I would literally work overnight, come home, shower, and then go to school. I played football and ran track. So I had I think about my life now, I'm thinking, wow, I've always had this capacity, or been graced with this capacity to do all these things and go to school. So then after I completed high school, I started in a different department, which was the patients accounting department, and I was just a filing clerk. So every time I came home from school break from university, I was allowed to come back to work. And so when I completed, I got the opportunity to work full-time there, while I also was volunteering in after-school programs. And then that volunteering in after-school programs eventually landed me a bigger role as a director. And so I started doing after-school programs. But I was the first black manager at the hospital at that time to take on that role, primarily because it's something that I've learned even through entrepreneurship, is being able to network and leverage relationships with the CEO and key people within the hospital. And so I got that role, and I think I was about, I don't know, must have been 7 or 8 years in. There had been 3 layoffs at the hospital, and I'm talking salaries up to $20-something million. It was all over the news. And my position not once got cut, and I was just really surprised by that. And then finally, I remember it was a July, this particular year, where I'm sitting at my desk and I'm saying, there's got to be more than life than this. Like, I love making the money. I had got me a nice little sports car. I lived in Oak Park at that time, and so I'm living the life, right? And all of a sudden, I'm sitting in my office, and the sun is shining through, and I pray, and I said, God, what are you calling me to do now? And it was youth ministry. And so I quit my job. I gave a 4-week notice to my job. Don't ever do this. I did this because I felt called to do it. I gave a 4-week notice to my job and told them, on this day in July, I think it was the 7th month of the 7th day in July, that was going to be my last day. And so nobody said anything for a few weeks. My director, everybody was pretty upset because the CEO of the hospital had to make me an offer that I couldn't refuse to get there, a few years before. And so to come back in that capacity. And so they wait till the last week of the 4-week notice. And she says, Terrence, where are you going? I was like, I'm just nowhere. I'm going to be a volunteer youth pastor. And she said, what? And she said...
So again, kind of playing back certain things, right?
Yes.
Growing up in the hood, your mom's focused on education, she's grinding out multiple jobs, you're actually working hard, putting yourself through school, getting the education. You now are buying your car, you're living, you've moved out in some ways, and And yet you do know that youth ministry doesn't pay very well, right, at that point in time. So you made this transition.
Yeah.
Why would you do that? Because it would seem on the surface your trajectory was exactly the way your mom may have hoped for it, right?
Yes.
And what you wanted for yourself.
Absolutely.
And yet you were leaving a major institution and stepping into youth ministry.
Yes.
Why? Why would you do that?
There was just this desire in my heart to make a difference. I mean, after all, the whole reason I was going to school was to, get into childhood education. And yet I wasn't doing that. And I still felt that the classroom was too restricted. And so youth ministry was that next sort of classroom that I get to make a difference and not be restricted. And while it didn't come with the financial resources that I desired, I knew that it was what God was leading me to do. And so I did it. And so the director of the department says to me, she says, wow, there's no one has ever in all the years of my career ever have given a resignation to do this. She said, this is so commendable. She says, how about you keep your same salary, make your own hours, come in, and this is before remote work was thought of, right? She says, and we'll pay you. And so I did that for 2 more years.
Oh, wow, okay.
But for the first, I say, 4 weeks of me giving my resignation, I never came back to the office. So I would go in probably once or twice a week and kept working. And it was just the most amazing thing until it finally came down to, okay, I need to transition completely out of this so I can completely focus on this. And I had gotten another job managing a multi-unit building in Oak Park. I think it was 95 units in Oak Park. Okay. That's where so then I moved into that building because I was managing it. So there, my rent is taken care of, and I still get paid, and I still get to do youth ministry. And so it all worked out in God's timing.
And there's still only 24 hours in the day, but you're doing all of it.
Doing all of it. But because basically what I had figured out, there's 24 hours in a day. If I was able to manage, if I could sleep at least minimum 6 hours, and if I was able to delegate responsibilities, which is part of my skill set that I believe has helped me to achieve the things that I've achieved today, is recognizing talents and skills and then being able to weave that into the task that we need to get completed. If I can do that successfully, then it increases the amount of time that I have in a day to do other things to get me closer to my goal. So
right.
Yeah.
Leveraging your time, whether it be from robotics or other people, team leadership, and making sure that everybody's playing to their strengths, including yourself.
Absolutely.
So then when you transition from the hospital, ultimately, and now you're into real estate and property management, you also looked at that saying that could be an additional pool of resources to pursue real estate. But there's a few dimensions to that, not just the business of real estate, but you shared with me a little bit of the influence that means and what real estate means back to especially the African American community as you shared it.
Absolutely. Yes.
So can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so growing up in the African American community, real estate was the answer to you getting out of poverty. Every single person believed that if you own land and property, that was the way for you to break the generational cycles, was real estate. And so there I was, managing this property, now understanding, being paid to learn what it takes to manage it, as well as how do you deal with people, and what is the income from this, and what is the cost to operate this. And so learning that at in my early 20s around there was amazing. And so then I start taking real estate classes at Triton College because I'm thinking, oh, this is great. Now I can do real estate and still do youth ministry. So it was always this back and forth between for-profit and not-for-profit and trying to marry the two together, which I call social enterprise, which eventually came out as that. And so that's where I think the motivation for that started. And, my diving into it, which then helped me to earn enough money to start, diving into some other business adventures after that. Yeah.
Well, and so those other business ventures, so now you're developing an expertise and an understanding of real estate. There's a financial crisis that was coming into play, 2007, 8, 9. And you also we're looking at it going, okay, real estate was in the tank, a lot of issues that were happening, and yet you and a business partner also saw opportunities to help people, not to prey upon or take advantage of in a predatory way individuals that were in hardship because of the real estate, but to actually help them and do it in a way where you could also make a living and be compensated for the work. What did that look like? How did you develop that business?
So basically, as you mentioned, the real estate crisis had hit. A lot of families were losing their homes, going into foreclosure. It was a crisis. And what we saw initially was these companies taking advantage of Black and brown families in the communities that we were obviously so connected to, charging them $10,000, $20,000 for loan modifications. And so we created a business called loanmodifications.com. And we created a platform for people to get their loans modified. And so we would get their interest rates reduced and then get a fixed amount and get the overdue balance forgiven, sort of some of the things that happen today in some instance. And then we also created Short Sale Solutions, which was an online system that allowed short sales to happen in a quicker time. So 30 for what was turning out to be 365 days, we were able to get all of the documents and things processed within 30 to 60 to 90 days. It connected the mortgage company, it connected the lenders, it connected the lawyers and all the clients and all those people at the same time in real time. And so that became a huge moneymaker for us. Fannie Mae, JP Morgan Chase, they started using our systems. And so when later on, I could go for it, but that put me in the best financial position I had ever been. Number one, we reduced the cost for people, which means that we charge only $500 to do the modification. My business partner was a lawyer, so he was able to do forensic audits of files, him and his team. And so we were positioned where we had all the skill sets to do things. My major role that I played in this particular part of the company was I was the negotiator. I would call the lenders and I would get them, and then I started developing relationships. But if we did a forensic audit and found something that was not right, it potentially put our client in a position to have a lawsuit, and the situation would have gotten a lot worse. And so then we later on realized, okay, the taxes on the house need to be modified as well because the value of the house has decreased. And so we went through that process. By the time we finished this, I had earned more money that I had made in the last 2 years by doing this. And I was just blown away like, wow, I would have never thought that we can actually create our own software. So we got developers. Some of our developers were here in the U.S., and then we learned to do business internationally. So we started doing work in India. And so we looked at our two systems and we're saying, wow, we paid this amount for this system to get completed. And it actually flows, it communicates better, and we can navigate it. This one we did here in the U.S., which is terrible, I know. Looking back, like, wow, we took our business offshore. In the U.S., it cost us more money, and it's just clunky. It just does not flow well. And so I started learning a lot about how do you create systems that provide solutions, number one, and how do you get them to communicate where it's not difficult and that our team of employees could actually make things work. And so I started learning a lot. And then, then the next step, evolution of my life start taking place of the next calling.
Well, and before we go there, right? I mean, all these skill sets. You talked about networking. You talked about relationship building, building rapport. Even if you're having a hard negotiation, right? You're building rapport with individuals. You're thinking of it from a legal view, a financial view, a tax view. I mean, you have to bring together a holistic vision of how do you come alongside and then provide these solutions. And with the resources now that you were earning in the for-profit business, you were also still helping various ministries and working with ministries and funding different work that was going on within that not-for-profit world. During this time, a little bit before the financial crisis, right? there's an aspect to a life-changing event that you experience that probably gives you more clarity on life than many people of your age. Would you mind sharing a little bit of that experience and how that crystallized the future vision for yourself too?
Absolutely. So during the time, and this is going back before the companies I've just mentioned, I was youth pastoring then, and it was on a holiday actually in May. I was stopping by an aunt's house to help to plan an event, and stopped at the gas station on 55th and the Dan Ryan Expressway. And I was approached by two guys. One asked if I had any, no, sorry, I was approached by one guy initially, asked if I had any change. And I said no. So sort of like a homeless person asking for change. I said no, I didn't have any. Turn around, start pumping gas in my truck. And then he pulls out a gun. He pulls out a gun and makes me get in my vehicle. And then as we're getting in the vehicle, two more guys come. And so there's three guys now, one on the passenger side of my vehicle in the front seat with the gun to my waist, and then two guys behind me, one with the gun to the back of my head. And so I thought initially they'll, get me at the end of the block, push me out, take my truck, and go about their business, but that's not what happened. Pulled me out in the back of an abandoned house, put me down on my knees, and put the gun in my mouth. And they just repeatedly told me how they were going to kill me. And so at this moment, I am completely, in shock. The only thing I can think about was my mom. I talked about earlier how my mom, what she did, the sacrifices she made for me, and now her only child, life was about to be taken. I just thought this will devastate her. Mm-hmm. And so with tears coming down my face, I just start praying. I start praying the verse in the Bible, Isaiah 51:17, that says, "No weapon formed against me shall be able to prosper." And as they have the gun in my mouth, and the guy's trying to pull the trigger, and nothing's happening. And so the other guy grabs the gun, "Man, can't you shoot this?" And I won't say what he said, but "Can you shoot this?" And so he tried to pull the trigger, but nothing happened. And so then the other guy, they grabbed his gun and tried to pull the trigger, but nothing happened. At this moment, I am just like, wow, I can't believe that I'm not dying. I'm not going to die tonight. So then they took the gun out my mouth and took it and just beat my face in with the gun until I was unrecognized. I passed out probably after the third hit. When I woke up, I didn't know if I had been shot or what, because there was so much blood coming out my face. It's like turning on the faucet, like it was just coming out. I didn't look behind me. It was along two houses, and so I went to the main street. I just started knocking on doors for help, but nobody came out to help me. And so I looked down at the end of the block. There are two guys there. One I often call the able-bodied guy, which is a reflection of sometimes today people can see something tragic or see someone going through something and they just turn the other way and keep going. Well, this guy got in his car and left. But then there was this guy, I oftentimes call, how I refer to him in this story is that he was my angel for that night. But he was alcoholic, drug user, and abuser, probably was the outcast in his family. He just happened to live in the corner house. He lived with his grandmother. He was an older guy, but he lived with his grandmother. He got his phone, called 911. As we're sitting there, the guy that got in the front seat of my vehicle was now on foot and got right in front of me. And I thought, when he got in front of me, I thought, oh, this guy's about to kill me now. Didn't happen. When he came out, the guy came out the house. He called him by his name. He just happened to live on that block. When he called his name, he put his head down and started running. That was the only way I was able to identify him. I ended that night with two blood clots in my brain. My entire face was fractured. They took me to one hospital. I left some parts of this story out, but they took me to one hospital. I had to be airlifted and taken to a more critical intensive care hospital, where then that's when my mom found out and my mentors and everyone found out and came to pray for me, because they needed to do brain surgery, they wanted to do plastic surgery, oral surgery, and I just could not believe that in this moment in my life, I am living the life that I felt God called me to live, and couldn't understand why this happened to me. And the interesting thing about this is that these were people that looked like me. These were young people, because the guy who in the front seat, he was 19 years old. This is the group that I felt called to help break the cycle. And so it was a whole lot of emotions of 12 weeks of not being able to. I didn't end up having to have brain surgery, which was a blessing. The thing that really shocked me was over 12 weeks I couldn't eat, right? So I had to drink out of a straw for 12 weeks. And I had all kind of stitches and things going on in my mouth. I had 3 oral surgeries. That was probably one of the most devastating parts of my journey.
Yeah.
But it was an eye-opener around faith. And so I promised God that if I made it through that moment or that season of my life, that I would be obedient to whatever I felt God leading me to do. And so not many years later, but years later is when then I heard God say, go to New Zealand. Yeah.
Well, and so come back to New Zealand, right?
Yeah.
Because the influence that even has for a lot of your work today.
Yeah.
The death rate of everyone is still 100%, but we know the tragedies that are happening in our own city and across the country and the world that just is senseless violence like you were a victim of.
Yeah.
We all have to deal with mortality,
Yeah.
but you had to deal with it at a young age and staring it right in your face too.
Yeah.
And it was that aspect of the clarity what we've shared as friends in separate discussions too, and that's always impacted me and influenced my thought, is that having that moment of realizing your life could be taken.
Yep.
And then pausing and saying, okay, I've been spared for whatever reason, and the divine intervention that happened for you that night, right? And again, you can't make sense out of these things. It's like, why does it happen for somebody and not for somebody else? Yeah. And no one has the answers to those. So I'm not pretending, right, for us to try to get our head around that. Mm-hmm. But you survived that evening, that event, and you basically made a declaration too. Yeah. That, okay, I was spared for a reason. I've got to go figure out what that is for my life, which is the story you're still writing to this day. Mm-hmm. Is that fair? Is that an accurate?
Absolutely. I definitely believe that, I didn't say this in the story, but I believe that one man or one woman's obedience is connected to so many other people's destiny. If it had not been for God touching that individual who could have been high or whatever that day, sobered him up in that moment where I was in desperate need of some support, I don't know if that I would be sitting here today. But because he did, it's my responsibility to live the life that I feel convicted by, and then also to provide an outlet or a bridge for someone else to live their life the way that God intended for them to live it as well.
So then we go back to coming out of the financial crisis, real estate business. You're praying about some things, and then all of a sudden you get a prompting to, kind of like you did when you left the hospital, you get a prompting to go, okay, you're going in a completely different direction.
Yes.
So what was that direction?
That direction, so after ending up in the south suburbs, I'm down in my office / prayer room, and I get the unction to go to New Zealand. And so I look at the globe, and this is hilarious, and I don't mean to, because sometimes when I'm amongst my family, it's like, black people do know how to swim, but I looked at the globe and saw New Zealand, and I'm thinking, heck, Lord, I don't know how to swim. Like at that time, I did not know how to swim. And then the other part of me is like, well, are there any black people there? Like, it's like all these things went through my head, but then I was reminded of my promise that I made to God. And so 4 weeks later, I had leased my house out, put my stuff in storage, and I was on an airplane to New Zealand. That was the longest flight I've ever taken in my life. It's so funny because I was asking, I would tell my pastor, tell my mom, and everybody's like, are there any black people there? Do they speak English? Do they have fried chicken? Like all of these things that you think like, why are you asking me those questions? But actually the same thoughts that I had of my own. And so I landed on the shores of New Zealand, and wow. Coming from the west side to end up in Auckland, New Zealand, absolutely blew my mind. Mm-hmm. Like beautiful, green, sunshine, blue oceans, and just the most kindest people on earth. Mm-hmm. And so when I got to New Zealand, I thought, man, this is the raw hand of God, undefiled by man's hand. I'm talking mountains, oceans, and I was like, what am I doing here? Because I didn't think like.
And you didn't have a job. You didn't have anything set up.
Didn't have a job lined up.
You got a plane ticket and landed in New Zealand and didn't know anybody. And
I purchased my apartment from online without ever seeing it. I purchased a vehicle online without ever seeing. There's a website kind of like eBay, but it's called Trade Me, and I did everything on Trade Me, and then got there and landed in one of the most affluent communities in New Zealand. And as I was saying to you before, I've never lived off, like I'm not from, I didn't do the Navy or, didn't do service in any way. So living in another country, getting there, realizing that the power outlets are different, and the currency is different, and then realizing the value of the American dollar, like $1 US was twice New Zealand dollars. And I'm like, well, I can live it up. I can live it up. And so learning those things, just when I say it really gave me a different perspective on life in the world. I think sometimes in the US, we become so self-centered that we think that this is it. And so, when God called me to New Zealand, it was an entire different life. And I say that was my walking on water experience. And so that's why all of my hashtags are relentless faith, because I literally had to walk on water, like literally to believe, okay, I'm responding to what I believe God told me to do.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how I'm going to earn. Thank God I still have my business in the U.S. with the websites and modifications and so forth. So I was able to work my business, remotely. Mm-hmm. But later on, hearing the story around how the indigenous people in the country and the Pacific Island people were sort of digressing in education and some of the negative representations in society equivalent to African American and Hispanic people here in America, and I just thought, wow, I can do something about this. I can help with this. Like, can you just imagine an American, any American, just going to another country and says, I can do something about this.
Yeah.
And so I learned the language. I started taking the language courses. And before I knew it, I was so immersed in the country. I drove around 7 days out of each month for about 6 months to evaluate why the outcomes were the way that they were. And so I would go to these different pockets of the country in impoverished community and realize very quickly that where I landed and the community that I lived in was not the experience of the entire country. And so that's when
so it's just, all these lessons, right? And again, it doesn't matter if it's for-profit or not.
Yeah.
You're doing your homework, you're doing your due diligence, you're doing your R&D, you're figuring out and learning and understanding before you come in and say, here's the solution and here's the answer, right?
Absolutely.
Especially in a foreign language. That ends up really making it clear, because of the extreme nature of it, is you're dropped into a country that you have really no idea how it operates, and you're figuring it out. You're seeking to understand first versus showing up and saying, I have an answer to a problem.
Absolutely.
And so as you kept doing that, keep going. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. So you can't provide a solution for something you have no clue about. You have to understand, okay, where does the problem, or whether the challenges stem from, and so that was my journey to go out to learn what each of those communities were struggling with. So in New Zealand, the school system operates on DeSalle system, and so DeSalle 1 schools are your affluent school districts, and then your DeSalle 10 schools are your school districts that are mainly impoverished sort of communities. Okay. And so the difference between the have and the have-nots are very evident. It's all a public school system, kind of like here in the U.S. However, the challenges that kids face in communities that are impoverished or have lack of resources are so vastly different than kids in communities that are affluent and have great resources. Mm-hmm. And so no matter what teachers you put in that school that's impoverished or lower performing school district, they're going to be faced with Groundhog's Day almost every day. And what I learned was something key. is that educators are taught to deliver a curriculum to kids to help them perform to the next academic level. However, when you're faced with kids who need largely social services, you're not qualified to do that,
right.
And nor should you be doing that. And so what we were finding that educators were having to do social services of which they were not qualified for, and kids just kept getting pushed through the system. And before, when they were old enough, they just dropped out because they lost the confidence to stay in the classroom, because as you get older, then your peers start making fun of you because you are not at an academic level that everyone else is at. And so the streets are way too quick to grab them. So after learning that, I said it will take decades or centuries before governments or municipalities figure out how to fix this. And when I got to the community where the kids from, they were faced with single parents in the house, or domestic violence in the house, or alcoholism, gang violence in the community. And so there was all these barriers. And so I said, the solution that I had.
The land isn't so foreign at that point in time,
not.
right? You
It's
have a lot of commonality that you're
A
finding.
lot of commonality based off the work I had done in Chicago, based off some work I had done exploring in the UK. These are common commonalities across countries at this point. And so I decided to get a place. So I became the executive director for the United Maori Mission of New Zealand, a 100-year-old mission. I was the first ever foreigner to be the executive director of. I had to be sort of inaugurated, like an inauguration, on Waitangi Day, the Treaty of Waitangi Day of New Zealand. That's February 12th.
And these are the Aboriginal people of New Zealand?
These are the native people of New Zealand, so the indigenous Maori people. And so there I was, taking on this role, finding out a solution for the InZone Project. So in the early days of InZone, the United Maori Mission was the umbrella of which InZone sat under. So it was its physical agent, amongst other things. And so I then there was a hostel that I converted into a home initially with my own funds, then growing it. In the first house, I had 28 kids, right? And so I didn't initially, so for everyone's thinking, this guy's crazy. Well, who goes to another country and taking, 28 kids? It wasn't my intentions to become the guardian of the kids. I didn't realize I had to do that until 2 weeks prior to them moving in. So I went around the country speaking the language. It was almost like a political campaign, inviting people in, and then they signed their kids over to me, and so we co-parent the kids, I would say, and so that grew, and then it just kept growing, and then
and they had to be selected into the program.
They did, yes.
Too, right? I mean, it wasn't just bring kids and drop them off parents if you want to.
No. It's a process. There's a vetting process. Obviously, there had to be need, so disadvantage was a big one, and then the dynamics of co-parenting with a family. And so because I was already a foreigner, there was some very strict rules that I had to put in place, but I also had to build a team to help me to vet the families that I was going to bring in initially, because I wanted the program to be successful. And so we had success in the first 10 weeks. Our kids academically started at the bottom, kind of like I did. This is so amazing having this conversation with you, because I wouldn't have drawn these parallels, but kind of like I did when Mom transferred me out of the school in our current neighborhood to the school at Dirksen Elementary, how I ended up in the bottom classes, and I also was labeled special, needing special education.
Yeah.
Same thing happened with my boys, my initial boys. And within the first 10 weeks, because of the support we were providing at home, what they were getting at school, the network that we had created, 14 of the 28 jumped streams. One jumped as high as 7 levels, which made history at the school.
Wow.
Now, mind you, in the entire country, this particular demographic was not performing at the academic levels that they needed to. Now you're at the most prestigious school in the country, and they're, performing.
They're
like
excelling.
This. And so we did that, got a bigger house the next year, 50 boys. And
is getting attention across the country of New Zealand.
Across the country of New Zealand. The Prime Minister at that time was John Key. He was just blown away. He came over to the house, and my kids had never been interested in politics until this point. He comes over to the house, and he is blown away. He's literally, faces red, in tears, could not believe that this was happening in his community. Like, this was like in his backyard. The community is Epsom community, which is one of the most affluent communities in New Zealand. And here I had this large group of kids that most of the country was fearful of, even the school was fearful of. And now they're outperforming
in
their
athletics, academics, the arts, everything.
Everything.
Yeah.
And it was one of the, I would say, oftentimes if those boys were talking now, they would talk about how I changed their life, but they changed my life. Like I went there out of pure obedience of what I felt God telling me to do, but they transformed my life in the sense that they grabbed the opportunity and just ran with it. And some of them are doing some amazing things in life now. Some are married, some are in their careers already. But Scan One, which is the for-profit.
Yeah, so talk about necessity is the motherhood of invention, right?
Yes.
So Scan One got born out of what you were doing back with InZone.
Absolutely. So can you imagine fathering or trying to father or parent 50 kids? And this is when it happened.
I can't.
It didn't happen at 28. It happened at 50. So I thought I was managing 28, and then I just increased it by 22 more and got 50 kids. And I couldn't figure out.
And you're the legal guardian of all of them.
I'm the legal guardian of them all. Who's playing rugby? Who's playing basketball? Who's playing? And I was, who's here? Who's there? And I just got tired of trying, because at first I was having them just write it down so I have it. And then I said, this is crazy. We have to get some technology. So I started looking U.S., the U.K., Australia, New Zealand for this technology, and I could not find it. And so I said, okay, well, I just have to create it. And so I spoke at a conference and just said, we're creating this technology. And all of a sudden, everybody wanted the technology. They wanted to talk to me afterwards. And I was like, oh, wow. Cha-ching, this is an enterprise. Let's do it. And so I found a business partner, Tristan Bailey and Darren Johnson, who are my business partners with Scan One.
And they're still your business partners today.
Still my business partners today. And so they had a very a successful business in security and all that. And so we merged not the businesses but our ideas together and created Scan One. And it just took off from there. And so as of today, our number, we started for our house, remember?
Yeah.
And then parents is like, oh, I can use one of those in my house, because it communicates in real time. So if I was traveling to the U.S. and my kids wanted something, it would just communicate. I was able to give permission. They had access to go and do whatever.
It's all biometric tracking.
All biometric tracking, access control.
So you developed it for the house and the kids for your own needs. Mm-hmm. But then you received awards for the construction industry in New Zealand, being like, no, this is what we need to help run our businesses. And it's continued to grow from that point forward. Yeah,
so the construction industry, as many may know, has been challenged over time with technology. So it's probably one of the lesser developed areas in technology is in construction. And so we saw an opportunity. And so we started catering to that particular industry. And that's our number one client is the construction industry. We do obviously work with corporate companies in all different sectors, but the construction industry is our biggest one. So we create pods of where they get dropped on sites. And so as the construction workers come in and out, there's this spinning sort of thing that goes through. Facial recognition. Okay. Finger scanning, access control. And so it monitors time and attendance, their credentials, and all of that, and it communicates back to the corporate office that kind of processes all of that information. So now you land, know nothing about the country. Yeah. You have got the Prime Minister's attention of what you're doing and affecting change through InZone. You now have a biometric tech business that you've started and is up and going and profitable in creating jobs and employing people and changing industry over in New Zealand, and then you get another prompting. Yeah, prompting to come home. It's so ironic. So Vendetta Films is we're doing a documentary on the work that I had done both in the U.S. and in New Zealand, and they wanted to film
In that film. Then it's called In the Zone. It was on Apple TV for a long time. I think now the full movie's over on YouTube.
It's on Amazon Prime.
It's on Amazon. Okay.
Amazon Prime. Maybe it's on YouTube. I don't actually know, but yeah,
okay.
it may be on YouTube. Too.
In the Zone. Okay, people can look that up.
Yeah.
And
so that's InZone. Zone. And so I come back, and while they're filming is when I feel the prompting to come back. Of course, the U.S. is a lot different when I come back than when I left. When I left, there was the first black president was elected, and I left and went to New Zealand. The irony of that is crazy. And so I come back, and I see some of the state of things. I see hollowed out schools in the neighborhood that I grew up in. The school that I actually went to before Mom transferred me was closed down. Buildings are boarded up, X's on them to be knocked down and demolished. And I just feel, the unction to come back home and help with a solution for Chicago. My boys in New Zealand were coming home doing essays on the crime, gangs, drugs that existed in Chicago, particularly Chicago. And they were black men and black young people. And so when I got back, I just felt led to come back home and to support with that. So I went back to New Zealand and did my succession hunting and found me a successor. And then I quickly realized this is another learning. What I was doing single-handedly, we had to hire 5 people to do the jobs, which was like shocking to me. And so learning about the cost of human equity and sweat equity was just enormous. And so learning that, and then President Obama, who was still I think he was in his final year when I was coming back for the filming, had what's called the U.S. Investment Summit. It's International Investment Summit. And so the U.S. Embassy of New Zealand ambassador, hey, Terrence, we want you to go over to this summit for Scan 1. And so I'm the only African-American delegate at this event. And I'm sitting at a round table. The person on my right owns an oil mine in some eastern country. And the one on my left owns a diamond mine. And I'm just thinking, why am I sitting at this table? And I think it was at that moment, that's when I learned for the first time around the minority business program that the government has, that if you're the majority shareholder of a company, that the U.S. will do business with you. And so that's where I start saying, okay, well, now it's time to start thinking about getting Scan 1 into the U.S. And as I look at rolling out potentially the InZone Project, of which I had no intentions on me personally doing exactly what I did in New Zealand here, I wanted to develop people to do it, and I just support and continue to be the ambassador for the program, because my heart, I kid you not, my heart was, and if you watch In the Zone, the film, my heart was just damaged trying to let go of my kids on that side, because when I tell you to spend so much time creating a family and then having to go so far away, I emotionally suffered a bit. Like I was like, wow, this was harder than I thought it would be. And so I traveled back and forth up until the pandemic came. Every 6 to 8 weeks, I would travel back and forth to New Zealand, obviously for my for-profit business as well as the not-for-profit.
Yeah. Well, gosh, Darren, maybe we should have scheduled a few hours for this because there's so many other topics. No, this is fantastic. And as Melissa and I have gotten to know you and Beside over the last several years, in relationship, living a couple miles apart from one another, the 10 boys, your mom in the house. I mean, just, the relationship side, watching the movie. I remember when we first met, it was like, oh, let's go watch the movie and find out a little bit more, and that ended. Melissa and I were just like, this guy's the real deal in who you are and how you live this out. how you view life and legacy, the difference you're making. I don't think you sleep 6 hours a night. I'm not sure you sleep, much more than a couple hours.
I actually get more than 6 these days.
You still have this bandwidth that's there, and all the different, the for-profit, the not-for-profit, the work's still going in New Zealand, the work here in the Chicago area and across the U.S. You're the real deal. I've learned so much from you. You're hosting racial reconciliation, discussions at your house. So the learning at a really core depth of humanity from one another in the way that lives have come together, and also the processing and thinking through, business and strategy and how this blends into, the capitals that I always talk about. Intellectual capital you've hit on, and how your mom started it, right, and inspired, and how you looked when you got to New Zealand, and thinking about how do you develop intellectual capital so that people have an opportunity to use their human capital to go work at night, work multiple jobs like your mom did, work in terms of figuring out and starting new businesses and solving problems that creates financial capital that can turn around then and be social capital and used for good to make differences and changes in life. So when you take those capitals together, that totality of stewardship, and you living that out is just inspirational and encouraging. Before we close, though, I know you started off and you talked about the breaking cycles of poverty. We've done a master class over at your house that you asked a few of us from our team to put on, and what that means back into the Black and Brown community and how you think about it. Yeah. So if you were to share some closing words of thoughts, inspiration, learning from your entrepreneurial journey to others that might be listening, please do.
Absolutely, and thanks for having me, John. If there's any nuggets I would leave for anyone, it doesn't have to be just Black and Brown, but it's if you are trying to change a cycle, and you're trying to create legacy, and not just necessarily generational wealth, but legacy, you have to first come outside of your box and creating networks. A network, being able to access a network of people who don't think like you, who potentially don't look like you, would open you up and allow you to learn so many different skills that could help you navigate to those next levels of success. And then the innovation, like one thing I now learned about my story is that my eyes were always open to seeking out a solution. And whether it was not-for-profit or for-profit, it's around what is it that I have in my toolbox that could help bring about a solution. Yeah. And I think that's really critical. And then the other part of that is diversity. Like, seek out ways to increase your circle of diversity. I think because you learn so many great learnings from people of different backgrounds that it completely blows my mind each day that I get to engage with different people. Yeah. And I say this to you all the time, and I said it earlier. When we met, it was probably at one of the most critical times of this season of my life, because I was entering into a new community. And I'll never forget the call that you made. You're reaching out to me, and we did I don't know if it was a Zoom call or a FaceTime or something, and you shared things you shared with me, and then you invited me into you and Missy's Bible study. And the relationship over the 3 years has just been amazing, and my wife and I both are really appreciate you both, and the value that you've added. Because I remember at a time where I wanted to just sell my business so I can buy a house, and he was like, "No, wait a minute, you don't do that." And so, like, honestly, just valuable nuggets that I didn't have growing up. And it's called, in some ways, I call it delayed development in some regards. And then God sends somebody like you to help me with those skill sets that I need to kind of navigate, the remaining parts of my life in business and in wealth. So thank you.
No, yeah. It's this is doing life together, right? Yeah. In terms of the different roles that we all play. And I do need to clarify, if I say Melissa or you say Missy or I say Miss, I have one wife, it's the same person. There's not, call her by 3 different names. I don't want anybody getting concerned about anything. But Terrance, absolute delight. I do encourage people to go out to learn more about InZone through the movie, more of your story that's still being written, right? These legacies aren't done. The books are still being written. And the difference that that you're making and the boys that we've gotten to know. Just it's great. It's great being a neighbor and a friend,
Absolutely.
and in study together too. So thank you again for sharing.
Thank you.
For any of the listeners that want to continue the conversation, please send us an email at clearconversations@ccpwealth.com. Thank you for joining us today. Have a great week.